Well guys, another day, another comparison, and this time we're going to be doing one compared to, actually I did this comparison last year and probably the year before, and this is one of my favorite comparisons because it's two super budget iPhones that, in my opinion, are still pretty practical. A lot of people are still using these type of phones, and it's not anybody's first choice. Obviously the iPhone 7, iPhone 6s, a lot of people consider these super old iPhones, and they're definitely old iPhones for sure, but they're not completely unusable. Like, they're still completely usable, and on Amazon right now, the iPhone 6s is selling for about $110. The iPhone 7 is selling for about $160. So you're definitely not going to be spending a bunch of money for these phones anymore, but they're still super practical in 2020 in my opinion. I've already done separate reviews for both of these, so if you want to watch those, you can go back on the channel and watch those ones. I just dropped those like a couple weeks ago. But even starting off with the front, okay, they look almost exactly the same, but there's some huge differences between the two. So 4.7 inch panels on both of them, 750 by 1334 IPS panels. Technically speaking, the iPhone 7 is a Retina IPS panel, but they're both Retina displays, which is kind of weird that one is considered that one. The iPhone 7's display apparently can get a little bit brighter, but in my cases of me using them, I've never experienced this one way or another, and it seems exactly the same. So you might see a little bit of difference, but for me, I think they're exactly the same type of panel. And as you can see, we have the same type of setup, home button on the front. What I will tell you though is that there's a bit of difference. So the iPhone 6s is an actual button, like you can actually click it and like it clicks in. The iPhone 7's is a vibration motor, which in theory is cool and I do like it a lot, but I will tell you there is quite a bit of an issue with this a specific home button, and that is when you go to replace the whole display with that front panel, you can't replace it yourself and still keep that Touch ID and home button. With the iPhone 6s before, the home button would work, but sometimes the Touch ID will not work depending on that if you swapped out the logic board or not. The iPhone 7's actually, whether you keep the logic board the same or change it, is not going to work because of that panel technology. You'll have to get it replaced by Apple in order for them to actually do that. So that's one thing that's a huge disadvantage for the iPhone 7. The repairability of the iPhone 7 is a little bit worse than the 6s. And even going on further, they both have lightning ports, but the iPhone 7 doesn't have a headphone jack, this was the first iPhone to remove the headphone jack. So you do not have that capability on the iPhone 7, where you do have that capability on the 6s. So you might like it, you might not, but you have that capability on the 6s where you don't have it on the iPhone 7. On the back, single camera setups on both, and a little bit of a different design. As you can see, the iPhone 6s, does have that aluminum build, so does the iPhone 7, but I kind of do like the iPhone 7's build. It does look a little bit better to me, but they're both almost exactly the same. There's really not that big of a difference between them in terms of design. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. Like I've stated, really the biggest downsides for the 6s might be because it's an older design. The iPhone 7 has a little bit of a newer kind of feeling to it in a way, but the 7 doesn't have the headphone jack and does not have that repairability aspect as the iPhone 6s has. So that's a huge thing right there. So kind of moving on. However, the iPhone 7 does have IP certification. It has IP67 dust and water resistance. The iPhone 6s does not have any IP certification at all, so that is a pretty big disadvantage for that phone. Not that big of a deal, some people might care, they might not, but you do not have that capability on the 6s where you do have it on the iPhone 7. So that pretty much covers it up there. Now moving on to the software, both phones started off, or they're getting now iOS 13. Both phones are there right now. The iPhone 6s is a year older than the iPhone 7. It started off with iOS 9. The iPhone 7 started off with iOS 10. Now there's a big debate going on whether the iPhone 6s is getting the next version of software or not. Now some people have said, well, most of the S series devices have gotten an extra version of software, so it could technically mean that the 5s got an extra version. I think the 4s did too, probably not. So some people are saying the 6s could potentially get the next version of software, and I honestly don't know. Like, obviously I don't have any insider information, so I can't really tell you, but based off my opinion, I have a feeling that the iPhone 7 might get an extra version of software and not the 6s because of that iPod Touch that came out, the iPod Touch 7th generation that has that same chipset as the iPhone 7. So I don't know. I mean, it could be the case that might happen, but I honestly have no idea. Like, it could go both ways. Maybe the 6s could get the extra version of software and the 7, but it hasn't been too frequent of a time where Apple has supported both devices with extra versions of softwares back to back. So it could happen, maybe, I don't know, but if I had to say it, I think the iPhone 7 might get it. But as of where we are at right now, iOS 14 is coming out in a couple months, so by the time you're watching this video in June or July, you'll probably already know the answer. But if I had to say it, I would probably say the iPhone 7 is getting an extra version of software. But in terms of iOS 13, both of these have been running them perfectly fine. I reviewed iOS 13 on both of these devices devices extensively, and they've been pretty much perfectly fine every way I looked at it. The one thing to keep in mind though is that yes, both phones, I'll say the stability is about the same on both, but both of these phones do support that check rain jailbreak, which is awesome and it's a godsend. So it's pretty much an unpatchable jailbreak. You can go and jailbreak this device on any version of software that these are on, which is so cool. So whether you're on iOS 10 or you're on iOS 12, you can go and jailbreak this thing, and it's a super easy process. It doesn't take too much time, and that's a capability that you have on these phones that even the newer iPhones do not have. So it's a pretty big deal. Whether you use it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just that you have that capability, which is a super cool thing. So in terms of software, yeah, they might end up at 2 different times, but that check rain jailbreak does add a bit of functionality in these, which is super cool. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the software. Now hitting on the performance of both of these phones, the iPhone 6s had the Apple A9 chip, a dual-core CPU, and 2GB of RAM on all the models, where the iPhone 7 has the Apple A10 Fusion chip, a quad-core CPU, and 2GB of RAM on all the models as well, the same amount of RAM on both models. And what I can tell you in terms of performances is that, when I'm using them like next to each other, or when I'm not comparing them side by side, like they seem exactly the same. Like I don't really think there's one that's way faster than the other one. However, when I do kind of load up apps side by side, definitely the iPhone 7 I think is a little bit faster. But even then, like I've been comparing all these phones on so many different versions of iOS, and it's not like it's consistently faster every single time. There's been times the 6S is faster, and there's been times where the iPhone 6S was faster than my iPhone 10 as well, which is really crazy. So I don't know if there's like a consistent winner every single time. It might be like on a per app basis, but between both of these phones, I wouldn't necessarily get one over the other just based off performance. I mean, if you had to, yes, the iPhone 7 is the faster device for sure. You have a quad-core CPU where you only have a dual-core on the iPhone 6s, and I think overall my performance on the iPhone 7 has been pretty consistent. There's been times where I've had like random weird issues on the iPhone 7 that are just beyond performance, which I'll talk about in the end of this video, but I think in terms of performance, they're like about the same. I don't think there's one that's way faster than the other one, but yes, I do think the iPhone 7 might be a little bit faster for sure, but the 6s definitely still holds its own. Whenever I'm using that phone, I'm still surprised by how smooth that experience is. This was the first iPhone to bring 2GB of RAM, and it's definitely, held up perfectly fine. Yeah, there are times where it glitches up, and sometimes it's too slow to open up an app or something, but at the end of the day, it's perfectly fine for my standards. And I think between both of these, like I've stated, the iPhone 7 definitely probably is the faster one, but the iPhone 6s is still perfectly fine in my books, so that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting it off with the camera, they both have single camera setups on the back, both have 12 megapixel sensors, and the iPhone 6s has a 5 megapixel front facing camera. The iPhone 7 has a 7 megapixel front facing camera. Both can shoot 1080p on that front camera. On that back camera though, we are able to shoot 4K at up to 30 frames per second and 1080p at up to 120 frames per second. And really the biggest differences in terms of the camera features is just that the iPhone 7 has optical image stabilization, where the iPhone 6s does not have it on that back camera, or even on that front camera for that matter. And that might be a big deal to you, it might not be, but I think both of the quality of the cameras are they're almost exactly the same. I don't think there's one that's way better than the other one, so they're both almost identical. They both have the same type of faultiness to them though, because both of them lack those camera hardware features. The iPhone 7 and the iPhone 6s only have single cameras. Whereas if you look at the cameras we have now, they have like dual, triple, quadruple camera setups. These lineup of 2020 phones are going to be bringing crazy number of camera sensors. And if you don't have at least like 2 camera setups, you're kind of already outdated. So between both of these phones, they're almost exactly the same. I would not get one phone over the other in terms of the camera. So you're both lacking those features on both. So it is what it is, but I'll tell you from first-hand experience, I would not get one phone over the other just based off the camera. So that pretty much covers it up there. Now ending it off with the battery life, the iPhone 6s had a 1715 mAh battery. The iPhone 7 has a 1960 mAh battery, and like I've stated before on both these phones, they're like almost like, I wanted to say like the 6s had the better battery life, but it's not the case. The iPhone 7 has the better battery life for sure, and the reason I wanted to say the iPhone 6s was because it is the older phone and it is cheaper to get, and I would always recommend people, and Apple has a tendency of decreasing the battery life over time. So we saw that with the 10 to 10s, we saw that with the 6 to the 6s, but luckily with the 7 it does have a bigger battery, so you're able to go and use it for a little bit longer. And some people say that because phones get faster and faster over time, battery life, if you get bigger and bigger, it still becomes less and less. Not necessarily the case here. Both phones are pretty close in performance. I saw that the iPhone 7 definitely probably has the better battery life for sure, but it's still like not a crazy difference in my opinion. However, what I will say is that I've had on some of my iPhone 7s some weird battery issues where my phone will just die randomly and the battery percentage is not accurate with the specific specific battery that's inside of it. So for some reason that's happened sometimes. I don't want to say all the time, but I never had that experience on any of the 6Ss that I've owned. I have like 3 iPhone 6Ss, I have like 3 iPhone 7s, and I've had issues on all my iPhone 7s, whereas on my iPhone 6Ss, I never had those issues. So that's kind of like the way I would kind of end off this video, is that yes, theoretically the iPhone 7 is the newer iPhone and it definitely has more features kind of, and it's a better phone overall, but there are still some weird issues with the iPhone 7 that Apple still needs to fix. You have those audio IC issues. I've had really weird issues of boot loops. When I updated to iOS 13, I had really random issues on my iPhone 7s. It's not the end of the world, it's not a crazy thing, but it's still kind of annoying that that is the case. So I think the iPhone 6S probably is the more stable device to get, but the iPhone 7 is still probably, it is the newer device and it still has a lot more going for it. But I don't know, man. If you want to take the chance, you can get an iPhone 7, but if you want a more stable phone, 6S is probably the way to go. But the weird thing is that the software updates, you might be getting more software updates on an iPhone 7, so that's one thing to keep in mind. So I don't think there's one phone that completely beats out the other one, but it's really on a per phone, per use basis. So I'll find the cheapest 6Ss and iPhone 7s that I find on Amazon and link them down in the description below so you guys can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it, man. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really discounts, so it'll mean so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.